All right, welcome to round two. Hopefully it's as good as round one, but this is 2.4 object reference. We are going to explain how reference variables work, identify null references, and understand how objects are stored and managed in memory. So let's get started. We are going to create an animal lesson. So hopefully open up a solo learn. We are going to put our three initialized variables. We're going to do a string name, a string type, and an int age. So we'll have two strings and then an int age. We're going to have a default constructor. We're going to call it animal lesson because that's what we named it. And then we're going to put the name, type, and age. So we're going to use our three variables that we did, make the first two unknown strings. So you need them in quotations, end it with a semicolon. And then with the int age, we are going to put age, and you just have to put the number. You don't have to put it in quotes or F or anything else. Just put the number and then the semicolon. So that's for a default constructor because we are not passing any parameters onto it. Now, for a parameterized constructor, we are going to put public animal lesson again. Then we'll do string name, string type, int age as our parameters. So anytime you pass parameters into a class, we need this to happen. And you can see this 3 times because we take our three variables and we say this dot name equals name, this dot type equals type, this dot age equals age. And that's just telling our program that these variables that we're putting in are actually these variables that get used throughout our class. And then we are going to display our data. So public void get display. So use a public void because we don't want to return anything. We just are going to run this, and whatever we run is what we run. And get display. So we want to print out some things on the screen. So that's why it's a void. It's not giving us anything for our game. It's just printing stuff out. So we're going to print the name with what we input the name to be, the type with what we put the type to be, and then age. So that's the first thing we want to do is type this up. Then we are going to run in our public class. So our public class program, we want to run this program. So we want to create an object. So the first thing we need to do is create a generic animal lesson. So we're going to use our class name that we used at the top. Then you're going to use whatever name you want to create the first object. I'm going to call it animal 0. And then we're going to say equals new animal lesson. So we're going to go back up to the class again. And then this time we're just going to leave it blank. That's telling the program when we create this object that we are going to do a default constructor. So when we do that, what we should be passing on to animal 0 is the default parameters, which is unknown, unknown, and 0. And if we do animal 0 dot get display, so hopefully it will display the name, the type, and the age. When we run this, we will get unknown, unknown, 0. So what do we do next? Well, where did this unknown, unknown 0 come from? It comes from the default constructor. So now let's create a new one. We're going to call it basic, okay? And instead of basic being a new animal, what we're going to do is we are going to pass animal 0 onto basic. So let's give this a shot. So let's create basic animal. And we'll call it object. So we're going to do animal lesson. We're going to call it basic. And we're going to set it equal to animal 0. So now what this should be doing is we created a new object called basic. And we're going to pass it on the parameters of our initial object we created, which is pretty cool because we didn't give basic any parameters. We just said, you're going to take on whatever animal 0 is. And then hopefully when we do basic dot get display, and then put our parentheses and semicolon, we should get the same thing outputted twice. Now, let's start to organize this. Let's do a system.out.println, and we're going to call this animal 0 because that's the one that got displayed here. And then do another system.out.println, and we'll call this basic. Okay. Now, let's create, we're going to call it basic2 animal object. And when we create basic2, so we're going to do animal lesson. I'm going to call it basic2. We're going to set it equal to basic. So we're going to pass those parameters on. And then I want to take basic2 dot get display, and I want to pass it on a dog, a beagle, and 12. Now, hopefully you are looking at something and going, something looks off. Is it going to throw an error message? It should, and it does, because when we look at this get display, we have dog, beagle, and 12, but look at get display. Are we putting in parameters in the get display? There are no parameters to put in, so this dog, beagle, and 12 don't really help us because that void idea, we're not trying to return anything. We are just printing off information. So if we want to pass dog, beagle, and 12 into basic2, we need to do it where there are parameters that we can put in. And anytime you see this, now we can put some parameters in. This is where it works. So where is this happening? It's happening in our animal lesson. So that means when we take away this basic, we're going to make a new object. We're going to call it animal lesson. And we're going to pass in those parameters. Now when we print off basic2, and let's do a system.out. System.out.println, and we are going to call this basic2. So now when we look at basic2's information, boom, you can see basic2 is a dog, a beagle, and 12. So that's where you have to pass the parameters on to your object. And our object is basic2. Now, here's the really cool part, though. So we want to pass basic2 onto our null object. And when I say null object, what we are talking about is a variable that has a null meaning. So we're going to do a basic3. But looking at our original object came from the default constructor, which was unknown, unknown, and 0. Watch what happens now. So we're going to take animal 0, and we're going to set it equal to basic2. And then we're going to do a system.out.println, and we're going to call this animal 0, and then take animal 0 dot get display. So remember, we started animal 0. Animal 0 we already know is unknown, unknown, and 0. That's what we started with. But this line of code right here, animal 0 equals basic2, we just passed all those parameters that we got in basic2 onto animal 0. And when we run this and print this, hopefully you will see animal 0 is dog, beagle, and 12. That's pretty sweet. Think about that from a game perspective. you start out a game at level 0, and at some point you get to a point where you level up and you gain new attributes, you gain new parameters. You would gain that dog, beagle, and 12 after level 1. So that's how these games pass these parameters on, is they find this, and at some point this animal 0, this starting figure that you were, now becomes level 1. And that's pretty sweet. So I tried to demonstrate this. You can see it in the Canva with Tony the Tiger. And if you take the tiger and set it equal to basic, you would actually take away all those attributes to Tony the Tiger, and it would be null. And then if you tried to go basic back to tiger, so you'll see that order matters when you do this. All right.